This example is going to show you a type of debugging technique that you can use. And remember that on one of the videos that we did previously, when we inputted, we have integers here. If I execute this code, and remember, if you are working in JDoodle, you need to have interactive mode on. If I execute this, and I'm supposed to enter two integers separated by a space, it says here. So if I enter 2 space 3, it works fine. But again, when you're first learning to code, don't trust the computer on anything. Try to break it. So let's input 2.3. And again, we get this funky error message. And so when you're trying to figure out what that's doing, and we don't have a sophisticated debugger here, there's a couple of tricks that you can learn and that you can do in order to actually, well, let's just go ahead. You can do what's called, and this debugging example is going to be an example of doing what I call an echo check. And so if you know what echolocation is with bats, they send out a sonar and then they get back some feedback right away, or they get back a sound, and that's how they navigate. Well, I'm going to get back some feedback here, and I'm going to output the length, or what the computer will output as the length. And so we are going to just have a couple lines of code here, and then I'm going to do my end of line character inside quotes there, and a semicolon at the end of that line. And I always misspell length. I don't know why, but those two characters on the keyboard run right next to each other. And then we're going to do the same thing with width, so then I can see what the width is. And so I'm echoing what the computer inputted. So it's going to input, and remember, it takes a character, converts it to the appropriate data type, and then outputs it. Or it doesn't output it, but it converts it to the correct data type, in this case the integers. I could also, just to show the different style of end of line character, do an end L. And so we are going to run this, and it's going to now, let's see what it does. We're going to execute, and I'm going to enter like the 2.3 and see what it does. Now, I didn't do all of my formatting the best because it's still running into each other. So for example, I'm going to put a carriage return before length there, execute again, do a 2.3, and so now it's picking up length is 2, width is 0, and then this 3 is just sitting out there in space. Actually, that 3 is like still sitting out there, I think, on the buffer. So I don't know what it's going to do down the road. It could cause some errors for this. That could be what eventually could be like a memory leak or something. So what it does again is it picks up that 2, and then it tries to read in this decimal point as the next character. Well, it doesn't know what that character is, and so every character is going to get assigned a value of 0, which is like false. And so then it outputs 0 times 2, which is the where it gets the area of the rectangle is 0. So what we just did there was what was called an echo check. I echoed what the computer actually stored for those variables. So it actually stored 2 for length and 0 for width. It's bothering me that there's not a space between those because it's a little bit hard to read. So if I execute that again, try a different number, 4.5, and it goes kind of bonkers again. Length was 4, width was 0, so that's why it gives us 0. Again, to fix this, we could decide to input data, and I could make sure that maybe my length is always going to be an integer, but then the other data would be maybe a double. Is this going to work? I'm going to try the 2.3, press enter, and now it does something kind of different. So the length was 2, now the width is 0.3. And so it was smart enough to know that 0.3, because what it did was it picked up 0.3, and because that's the floating point or a decimal number, remember floating point just means that it's going to be a decimal, then it worked correctly. Okay, so as long as that second value was a double, then we were fine. Now if I switched it around and did double for the length, now I'm curious. I want to figure out what's going to go on here. And I do integer for the width and we want to make the area a double. So let's execute and see what happens. And I want to input 2.3. Now that's a double, so it should take the whole 2.3. But now if I press enter, it's just sitting there waiting. And it's waiting because it accepted that enter as the space. That's a separator. It doesn't really care if it's a space or it hits the enter key. It's just waiting for you to enter another number. So 7, press enter, and we are good. If I execute that again, and I try 2.3, press enter, and let's try 7.5. Well, it doesn't even let me get to the 0.5. It just takes 7's the integer that I want, and then it moves on. Alright, so that gives you an example of how you can echo what the computer is actually reading in, and use that echo check to kind of not error-proof, but debug your code. You can, while you're working on code, then just comment out those echo checks. When you're all done, before you turn stuff in, you want to clean it up and hit delete. And so once you get your code fixed, you want to delete those echo checks. As a beginner programmer, you might want to just keep a copy of it for yourself. But when you go to turn stuff in, I'd like to have you clean up that code and make things nice and neat.